Thank you all for joining our webinar today, Landscaping with Native Plants. I am Megan Ademeyer. I'm a conservation planner with the Clallam Conservation District, and I will be on the webinar today to provide technical support. So if anyone has any trouble during the webinar, feel free to put any problems in the chat box, or also you can call me on my cell phone, which was shared in the email with the Zoom link. So today, our executive director, Joe Holtrop, will be the one doing this wonderful presentation. Joe has worked for Conservation District since 1988 and became Clallam Conservation District's first employee in 1989. He's served as manager for our district since 1999. Joe has a Bachelor of Science in Landscape Architecture and a Master's in Adult and Continuing Education from Washington State University. He also has a Master's in Landscape Architecture from the University of Michigan. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Joe to begin this wonderful presentation. Thank you all for joining us.
There will be in-person voting at the Army Square building in Port Angeles, where our office is located, on March 19th from noon to 8 p.m. Or if you do not want to come in and vote in person, and which is understandable given the threats of COVID, you can request an absentee ballot and you can contact our office about that. And all the details on how to do that is available on our website. So we have one elected position currently held by Scott Chitwood that expires this spring. So that's the background on conservation districts, and now we'll get to the reason why you've tuned in today. Here are the topics we're going to cover. I'm just going to give a brief intro about why it's a good idea to landscape with native plants, and then give a brief overview of how to do a site analysis and develop a landscape plan and some design basics to help you figure out what sorts of plants that are suitable for your growing conditions and that will serve your needs. And that'll take up about the first half of the presentation. And then I'll go through most of our common trees and shrubs, many of which that we sell in our plant sale, describing each of those plants and their suitability in different landscaping situations and habitat values and that sort of thing. And then a little bit about bare root plants, which we sell in our plant sale, and how to take care of those plants when you get them. And then finally finishing up with site preparation, planting, and maintenance tips. And in case you're wondering when this stupid, boring presentation is going to get over, there are a total of 56 slides, and the first question and answer period is halfway through. And that'll be right after that landscape site analysis and design section. And then we'll have another time for questions after the plant descriptions. So that's the plan. And now let's get into it. So ideally, our landscapes are going to serve our needs. And we have many needs perhaps from our landscapes, but basically it boils down to growing food, a place to recreate and relax, and hopefully our landscapes inspire us as well. So every landscape should be serving those functions for us. And then if we do it right, our landscapes will also be beneficial to the environment, at the very least not detrimental to the environment. So if we can landscape in a way that meets our needs, but also enhances fish and wildlife habitat and does not exacerbate stormwater runoff problems, maybe helps with that, and also improves air quality, then we've got the ideal landscape serving our needs and in harmony with the environment. So that's what we're striving for. We like to call it here at Clallam Conservation District natural landscaping. which is essentially just landscaping with nature. So you have to, in order to landscape with nature, you have to understand what nature is giving you to work with, and then you adapt to that. And so rather than making your site and making nature conform to your needs, you are conforming to what nature's giving you to work with. So to do that, you gotta understand what conditions you have, and we'll go through some of these things. But basically, you're looking at your soil, what type of soil you have, the topography and moisture conditions, and your climate and microclimate, and adapt to those things. And then your foundation of your planting is going to be natural or native plants based on natural plant communities. And then a key with natural landscaping is that you view your site conditions as opportunities, not as problems. Try to think of it that way, and you'll be successful. Okay, so that's the basics of it. And here we have two examples that do not fit what we're trying to promote. Up in the upper right-hand corner, you've got the beautiful landscape lawn that takes a lot of inputs to maintain that. A lot of mowing, a lot of weed control, irrigation, that sort of thing. Beautiful, but not very sustainable without a lot of manipulation. And then the other extreme is one you've probably seen around Swim, with the nice gravel lawn that does not have to be mowed, doesn't have to be irrigated, but it's not very inspiring and doesn't provide much in the way of habitat, and is not zero maintenance. It's less maintenance than a lawn, but these gravel lawns tend to grow up with weeds. What people often do is they cover the ground with landscape fabric, and then they cover the landscape fabric with gravel, and that keeps the seeds that are in the soil from germinating and sprouting up through, but it doesn't prevent seeds from blowing in, weed seeds from blowing in and germinating in the gravel, and then the roots will grow down and penetrate down through the landscape fabric, and then they're almost impossible to pull out once that happens. And so the standard method of maintenance in these gravel yards is spraying glyphosate or Roundup to kill the weeds. So these are two extremes that we're trying to avoid. Something in between is what we're after. Okay, and the theme is native plants. And you may be asking, so why should we landscape with native plants? Well, essentially because they're going to be successful. These plants are adapted to these conditions that we have here. They've evolved under this particular climate that we have, the soils that we have, and all the native pests and diseases. And as long as you match the sunlight and soil moisture requirements to the plant, you're almost guaranteed to have success. Okay, and so it just makes it easier. You don't have to know nearly as much as if you use non-native plants, and you got to do a lot more research to find out whether or not you're going to be successful with the plants. And then the other big advantage of the native plants is our wildlife, native wildlife, insects, pollinators, all those critters, they evolved with these native plants. And some are very particular. Some species of wildlife and particularly insects are very particular in the types of plants that they need, and they're predominantly the native plants that we have here. So two reasons to go with native plants there. All right. So if you're thinking about ordering plants from us, we sell them in bundles of 10, 25, and 50, depending on the species. And so you're going to get a number of plants if you place an order. So you want to do some research before you place that order, so you get what's going to meet your needs. And here are the steps you should follow. This is regardless of where you're getting your plants. You should go through these steps. You first figure out what it is you want and need. out of your landscape? What are your landscaping objectives? Then you analyze your site, figure out what your site's capable of doing and most suitable for, and you try to match the two up, and hopefully you can achieve your objectives with the site conditions that you have. And then you take it to the next level and start developing a schematic plan without getting into too much detail, just very rough concepts and ideas. And eventually you get down to designing specific spaces in your landscape and eventually selecting the particular species that are going to go where. And we'll go through this, some examples of this here shortly. So figuring out your wants and needs, everybody's got different wants and needs. This is just some examples here from our family here. And this little guy here, this is my son, Eric. This picture was taken a long time ago. He's 18 now. So, and that's Eric and the giant spud. But here's an example. And it's always a good idea to go through the exercise of writing down your objectives. It helps solidify those things in your head by going through that little exercise, and you really figure out what's most important to you. And in many cases, it's there's going to be more than one person that's going to have to agree on what those priorities are. So if you got them written down, then you can do a little negotiation there. So here's just an example, but I encourage you to write down your objectives, what you hope to get out of your landscape. And then if you can prepare a little sketch of your property, that's helpful to start making notes when you go out and do your site analysis. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but it is very helpful to have a little sketch to take notes on. And the first thing you're going to want to do is identify all your built resources, all those things that you're going to have to work around as you do your landscaping, any structures, septic drain fields, utility lines, those sorts of things, driveways. Those things are probably not going to move, and you're going to have to work around those things. So you can put those onto a map, and then you can start doing some site analysis. And one of the most important things you're going to want to look at is your soil. And there are various things to look at with the soil, but the key thing to look at is the soil texture. The reason for that is the soil texture determines how moisture behaves. If you got a sandy, gravelly soil, it's going to be well drained. You're not going to have any saturated soil issues. However, that soil doesn't hold moisture very well, so it's going to dry out very quickly. If you go to the other extreme of clay, then it holds a lot of moisture, stays moist for a long time. However, you can have a high water table oftentimes with clay soils, or a perched water table, and it's poorly drained. So the types of plants that like to grow in clay typically are not the ones that like to grow in a sandy, gravelly soil, and vice versa. So those are the two soil textures to make note of. And around here, you can have both on 1 acre. You can have clay soil, and then a little ways away, you can have a sandy, gravelly soil. If you have a silt loam, that's the best. That's the most forgiving soil. It tends to be reasonably well drained, yet has a high water holding capacity. So you don't have drainage problems, and it doesn't dry out really fast. So those are the factors you want to look at when you look at your soil. And the best way to do this is to just go out and start digging some holes and see what it's like there. Okay. And back to the site analysis. So you've done your inventory of your built resources, structures, those things. Then take notes about some other factors to take into account. Do you have desirable mountain views you want to preserve? Do you have some other views that maybe you want to screen? Do you need to create some privacy? What direction does the wind blow from? Where do you have very open sunny areas? Where is it very shady? Are there plant types of vegetation that you want to get rid of, or types of vegetation that you want to enhance or preserve? So wet areas, make note of those things. Pretty simple, nothing real fancy about it. And then you go back to your list of your objectives and try to figure out how can you achieve your objectives given these conditions. And so here we have, if you remember from the last slide, there was a septic drain field out here. There was a nice mountain view in this direction. So you want to keep that open. And grass, turf grass, is one of the best things to grow over a drain field. It's the easiest, safest thing to have over a drain field. And so that preserves the view. And then that lawn transitions to a more wild meadow-like type of ground cover, but still keeping the view open as it goes down to this wetland. Remember, the wind was blowing from this direction, and there was a undesirable view off in this direction here. So you would want to plant some taller trees and probably evergreens to screen the view and provide some protection from the wind. Okay, and vegetable garden, you want to keep that in close by the house. So you get the idea here. Now I'll show you, and this is I think a 2.5 acre parcel was the scale of this one here. But here's a city lot example, and this little illustration comes from I got it from Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife website, which I looked here recently and I couldn't find it again, but it's also, it was done by Russell Link, who wrote the book Landscaping for Wildlife. He was a wildlife biologist and landscape architect, and he's got a really good book if you're interested in that stuff, Landscaping for Wildlife by Russell Link. But so here's a site analysis, and then going to a little bit of that schematic plan where they're just bubble diagrams with concepts identified in different areas. But if you have several photocopies of your base plan, then you can take lots of different notes as you start exploring different ideas that you want to pursue with your landscaping. So then you take it one step further, and those concepts get developed a little bit more. This is, obviously kind of fancy stuff that most people aren't going to do, but it doesn't have to be pretty as long as you understand what you're trying to achieve. Okay. But see, there's no detail in here yet. You don't see a single plant species identified on this, because it's schematic plan is just general concepts that you're going to try to pursue. Your landscape's divided up into spaces serving different functions. And then you get into the nitty-gritty of your planting plan. So this is what landscape designers and landscape architects would do. Eventually, they'll have a list. They'll have a plan that has where every single plant's going to go on that parcel, and they're all listed over here. Most people are not going to do this for themselves and don't need to do it for themselves. But if you're hiring a landscape contractor, then you probably want something like this. So so you and they are on the same page, and you are assured that you're going to get what you really want. Okay. And then to help you avoid getting overwhelmed by all of this, it's a good idea to divide your property up into different zones. And so again, this is a 2.5 acre lot, or maybe 1 1/4, I can't remember, but It's a good sized piece of property, and a lot of people around here move on to large lots like this from city lots. They've spent a good portion of their life in the city on a city lot, and then they all of a sudden they've got 1.25 acres or 2.5 acres, and they think they need to landscape the entire property like it's a city lot. You don't want to do that. So divide it up into zones. This zone 1, this is where your city lot type landscaping would happen. This is where we spend the vast majority of our time. This is where anything that needs a lot of attention or a lot of maintenance should just be limited to this zone 1 here. If you've got a vegetable garden, fruit trees, any special ornamental plants that you really like, you limit those to that zone 1 there. And then you transition from zone 1 to out here. You got a transition zone, and then this zone 3 is essentially wild. It could be something that you restore back to forest. If you're lucky enough, you already have forest there, or you can just let it grow up as meadow, but you don't have to mow it all as lawn. And you can go from a manicured lawn here to an area that's never mowed over here with one that's is mowed periodically, but is maybe still turf grass. And if when you don't mow it, it only maybe grows only waist high. And so that provides a gradual transition from the more manicured to the totally wild part of the landscape. And here you can see another view of this. So here's the zone 1. This is the people place. This is where we spend most of our time, where we feel safe and comfortable. And then this is zone 3 out here, where it's pretty wild. You don't need to do any maintenance. You just can go out and enjoy it when you want to, but it's a safe refuge for a lot of wildlife. And then you've got a transition zone between the two there. And maybe you have a water feature, a bird bath, bird feeders, something like that in your zone 1, and you can entice some of the less common birds to come visit you, but then they've got a safe place to go roost and nest and things like that. So by doing this, then you're spending the bulk of your efforts focused on just this area right here, and not getting overwhelmed by trying to deal with the whole rest of your property. Okay, so after you've figured out what you want and need out of your landscape, and then what your landscape is suitable of providing, and then you've done these plans and divided your parcel up into different spaces serving different functions, that's when you start working on your planting plan. And it's a good idea to keep your lawn area as small as possible, because lawns are very demanding parts of the landscape. They take a lot of maintenance. They're easy to get established and a good ground cover, but some people get obsessed with dandelions that are growing up in them and other things, and spend a lot of their time slaving away trying to keep that lawn looking nice. So try to keep your lawn area as small as possible. And then you just kind of go through this decision tree. You figure out, do you want a tree or do you want a shrub? And always be keeping in mind the mature size of the plants as you're going through this step-by-step process. And then do you want it to be evergreen or do you want it to be deciduous? And there are going to be different factors that'll come into play as to whether you want evergreen or deciduous. If you want to screen something, you're probably going to want evergreen. If you want a windbreak, you're probably going to want evergreens. If you want some summer shade, but you want winter light to come in, maybe you want a deciduous tree. So think about those things. And then as you start developing your palette of plants for a particular area, group them according to their requirements, focusing mostly on moisture. I've seen a lot of orders come in where there are 3 species that do very well in sandy, gravelly soil, can take really dry conditions, and then 1 species that hates that and really has to have really wet conditions. And so when I see that, I wonder, do these people who are placing this order have those different conditions on their site? Because if they don't, then you're going to be if you plant that water-loving plant in with the others, then you're going to have to be irrigating probably all of those plants in order to keep them surviving. Whereas you could just put the wet, moisture-loving plants together in one spot, and the other more drought-tolerant plants elsewhere, and you'll be much better off. Okay. And I have a little rule of thumb. I do a little mental exercise whenever I plant something. I try to think of at least 3 functions that the plant's going to serve by being in that particular place when I put it in the ground. And I've just listed some of the many functions that plants serve. But if you go through this little mental exercise, you will chances are you will figure out that maybe that wasn't the right place to put that plant. And always, like I said, always be thinking about the mature size of the plant too. But this is helpful for avoiding some mistakes. All right, and a really good resource to go to it's an interactive website that King County has, where you can search for plants, and you can see up here you got plant type. You can click on whichever type of plant that you want, tree, shrub, ground cover, deciduous, evergreen, and then the moisture requirements that you have. Do you have a dry site, sandy, gravelly soil, or do you have a wet area? You click those various things, and what's the sun exposure, sun shade, and then there's some more detail you can put in if you want. You don't have to, but you click on search, and it'll give you a list of native plants that meet those criteria that you've selected for. So this is where the website is. But if you go to King County landscape, you can probably find it. I'll leave it up there for a moment for people if they want to jot this down. This is really hard, not knowing if anyone is even listening to me here.
You're coming through loud and clear, Joe. It's been a great presentation. So I assure you we're all here just absorbing a lot of knowledge.
Yeah, thanks, Megan. I need the feedback. I usually have to dance around and wave my arms around stuff to get rid of nervous energy too. But
oh no.
So now we have an opportunity for some questions. And I don't see any so far. If you need to take a break, the restroom's just down the hall.
It's so hard in this format, isn't it, Joe, when we're so used to doing these in person. So yeah, it's great to have all of you tuned in for these, but yeah, it's like talking to no one, kind of like talking to yourself when presenting, isn't it?
Yeah, and I can't even see anyone, so I don't even know if people are sleeping or what they're doing, but
no, I think we're just all taking down great notes. So keep up the great work.
All right, thanks, Megan. Okay, so that was the first section here, and we're halfway through the slides, and then the next part is going to be all about describing the common trees and shrubs that we have. And I just threw these in here for a little bit of inspiration of what you might be striving for in your natural landscape. Okay, we're going to start with trees and run through our common conifers and deciduous trees. And so I'll go through each of these one by one. Here we have grand fir and Douglas fir over here. So first of all, Douglas fir, that's probably our most common conifer on North Olympic Peninsula. It's a very fast growing tree. All it needs is sunlight, but it has to have sunlight. So you see here, and you've seen this, I'm sure you've been in the woods and you've seen these big old Douglas fir trees. All the needles and all the branches have died down below, and there's just at the very top is where the live needles are. That's because Douglas fir is not tolerant of shade at all, but it can grow in really dry conditions, sandy, gravelly soil, and if it has good growing conditions with adequate moisture, it'll grow 3 feet a year. So very fast growing tree and easy to grow, but has to have sun. And it's also grown as a Christmas tree, as is the grand fir. So here you have the grand fir, commonly has this sort of columnar look to it, very symmetrical look. Needles are often confused with that of the Douglas fir, but they're typically a little more shiny and very flat on the stems. And grand fir will grow in sun or shade. So you'll find them growing side by side with the Douglas fir. They grow pretty much in the same places, but the grand fir appreciates a little bit more moist growing conditions than the Douglas fir has to have. And again, it can grow in sun or shade, and not nearly as fast a growing tree as the Douglas fir is. And now we've got a couple of trees that like shade, at least when they're young. You got the western red cedar here and the western hemlock. And neither of these are grown as Christmas trees. Both, like I said, when they're seedlings, they prefer shade. Under natural conditions, they would be the understory species that would grow up underneath a Douglas fir forest, and if there were no wildfires, they would eventually become the climax species. And they prefer a lot more moisture than the Douglas fir needs. But again, you'll see the two of these growing side by side, even in the dry parts of eastern Clallam County. But if you have wetter conditions, these are a better choice than the Douglas fir, especially the western red cedar. And one of the nice things about the western red cedar is although you're not seeing it here, but on here you see it, the branches will grow all the way down to the ground, and which makes for a nice windbreak. So they don't, if they're not overly shaded, they'll keep those branches right down to ground level. Okay, so hard to grow as seedlings out in the wide open sunshine. But once they're established, they can certainly tolerate full sun, but a little bit difficult getting them established there. And a couple of conifers that like to grow near the shoreline. You got the shore pine. This is a classic shape of shore pine, Pinus contorta. So when they're out and exposed to the wind on the bluffs, where they commonly grow, then they tend to be these sometimes multi-stemmed and contorted shape, kind of bonsai looking trees. They have to have sun. They do not tolerate shade, just like the Douglas fir. They have to have sun. But other than that, they can grow in sandy, gravelly soils or in boggy soils. Out on the coast, they'll grow in areas that get periodically flooded. And if they have really good growing conditions with plenty of sunlight and good soil, plenty of moisture, they're a very fast growing tree. However, I don't know if this is just my experience or common, but I think perhaps because they grow so fast and the shape of the branches, they tend to collect a lot of heavy wet snow, and the branches break very easily. A couple of years ago when we had the big snowstorm, several of the short pine that I had, tops broke right out of them, and huge branches broke off of them. But nice, and they're the smallest of the conifers that we have too for mature size. If you have a sunny location, they're going to be a good conifer choice for fast growing. And then Sitka spruce. Sitka spruce likes to grow right along the coast where it's foggy or rainy. And as you go out, they're not very common east of Port Angeles, but as you go west of Port Angeles, they become very, very common, especially right along the coast. And they're very, very hardy and pretty fast growing. And a little trick that we learned from one of our board members from a few years ago is to plant Sitka spruce with cedar. So cedar, the deer and the elk love to browse the cedar. That's one of the real drawbacks of cedar, and one of the challenges of getting those established. But you can plant Sitka spruce seedling right next to the cedar, and the needles on the Sitka spruce are really sharp and stout and pokey. And so when the deer come along to browse the cedar, they poke their nose on the Sitka spruce, and they don't like that, and away they go. And then once the cedar is established enough, then you can just prune off the Sitka spruce and kill it, and away you go. So nifty little trick that we learned from one of our board members. So I see a question that is pertinent to this right here. Question is it okay to prune short pine to maintain view? Yes, short pine is very easy to prune. However, I'm not exactly sure what you're getting at here, because a lot of people like to top trees to maintain views, and that is, generally speaking, a bad idea. When you top a tree, then that they become very susceptible to disease, and they just don't like to. Conifers do not like to be topped. However, of all the conifers where you might be able to get away with that, short pine is one of those. Okay, so those were our conifers. Now, deciduous trees, and I've got three maples here with the big leaf maple, which you're all probably very familiar with. Big tree, big canopy, huge leaves, very nice fall color. Produces a tremendous amount of leaf litter and seeds and pollen in the spring. You need a lot of space to plant a big leaf maple, because they spread out, and all these leaves fall and cover the ground, and makes a great ground cover underneath. The leaves will kill the grass underneath. That's some people don't like that, but I think that's a big advantage, that you get a lot of free mulch out of the big leaf maple. And again, nice fall color. All of the maples have really nice fall color, but the king of fall color is the vine maple right here. Vine maple is a small tree, grows to 25 feet or so tall. Sometimes it's multi-stemmed, sometimes single trunk, but has this beautiful fall color that typically starts getting the fall color in August, and hangs on to that color into November. So long period of time with orange and yellow fall color on the vine maple. The vine maple can tolerate a lot of shade. It can also tolerate full sun, but what it doesn't like is being exposed to sun and wind. So where it does best, and where the fall color is best is on the edge, where it's getting sun, but it's also protected from the wind. And then the Douglas maple, also called the Rocky Mountain maple, is very similar to the vine maple. Typically, it's more single trunked tree rather than like the vine maple is frequently multi-stem, but they're about the same size. Has very nice fall color, not quite as nice as the vine maple, and generally doesn't last. The fall color doesn't last nearly as long as the vine maple fall color does. The Douglas maple will leaf out at least a month earlier in the spring than the vine maple does also. And it's quite a bit hardier than vine maple. It can tolerate being out in full exposure to sun and wind. And it can also tolerate a little bit of shade as well. So those are your three maples. These two, Douglas maple and vine maple, are small trees and would be suitable on city lots, very small lots. The big leaf maple is only really good for much larger lots, where there's a lot more space. A couple more deciduous trees here. We got the Pacific crabapple, which is indeed a crabapple, native to the Pacific Northwest. And the crabapples are little tiny things, almost look like cherries. The blossoms, though, look just like your classic apple blossom. The trees themselves are oftentimes multi-stemmed, grow in these messy-looking thickets. Oftentimes, they're really good for wildlife. You got the blossoms for pollinators, and you have these fruits that mature very, very late in the season, and in the fall they're a good source of fruit for many birds. I would not personally recommend planting the crabapple in your manicured part of your landscape, because they are kind of messy looking trees. But if you can tuck them in somewhere where it's a much more natural part of your landscape, they'll do well, and provide habitat, and you won't notice the messiness so much. They can grow in a variety of soil conditions, but they really do prefer more moist soil than they won't do real well in a sandy, gravelly soil, but they can tolerate some periodic flooding as well. And then the red alder, you're all probably familiar with that. Common deciduous tree, very fast growing, pioneer species, a nitrogen fixer, provides a lot of benefits for wildlife as well. This is one, again, that I would not recommend planting anywhere near structures, not on a city lot. They grow fast, they're weak wooded, branches break off in windstorms. They can quickly become hazard trees. But if you've got the space, they're a very important part of the ecosystem. So they have their place. Okay, those were the trees. Now we'll move on to the shrubs, and we'll run through all of these here. There's my son Eric again, examining the red flowering currant. His interest in plants did not last much longer than that. I make him go out and mow the lawn, and that's about all he does in the landscape now. Okay, starting with the harbinger of spring here, we have the Indian plum. Indian plum is a shrub that leaves out and blooms typically in late February. One of the first plants to come to life towards the tail end of winter, when you're sick and tired of winter and wondering, is spring ever going to come? and then this starts leafing out. First leaves out, it's really bright green leaves, and spring's right around the corner. And Indian plum, it'll grow in a variety of soil conditions and is pretty drought tolerant. Where it really prefers to grow is an understory of deciduous trees. So if you go down to Voice of America, Dungeness Recreation area, you can see a lot of it growing down there underneath some Sitka or some Schooler's willows and bitter cherry and other places are growing underneath cottonwoods. The overstory trees, they don't leaf out until 2 or 3 months after the Indian plum has started to leaf out. So they have a period of time there where they're getting filtered sun. So that's what they like. They can also tolerate full sun. They don't do nearly as well in full sun, but once they're established, they can take it. And these blossoms, they have male and female plants, so you don't get the fruits on all of them, but these are the fruits that eventually develop on the Indian plum, and they're really tiny, but eventually, so they start out green and then yellow and pink, and you get multiple colors on individual clusters, and eventually they're this dark plum color, and they look identical to Italian plums, but they're really tiny. And at my place anyway, once they start to get to a little bit of maturity, then the cedar waxwings show up and they gobble them down. So that's a side benefit because I like cedar waxwings too. But one thing the cedar waxwings will do though is as they eat all these fruits, which are mostly pit, mostly seed, they pass those seeds and spread them around in other places, and then you get a lot of free plants. Some where you don't necessarily want them, but others where it's nice to have them. So they'll volunteer. You'll see volunteer Indian plums popping up all over the place. And now we've got the red elderberry and the blue elderberry. Red elderberry blooms in early spring, and then has these red fruits that again the birds, robins, and various other birds love the fruits on the red elderberry. And the blue elderberry, it blooms in the summertime, and the fruits don't mature until early fall, late summer, early fall is when the fruits on the blue elderberry mature, ripen. The red elderberry is a multi-stemmed large shrub, and the blue elderberry is sometimes multi-stem, sometimes single trunk, small tree. I would consider it more of a small tree than a shrub. The red elderberry can tolerate a lot of shade, but it can also tolerate sun. Blue elderberry likes to grow more out in the open sun. Both great for wildlife. Neither one are very attractive plants, particularly when they have lost their leaves. When they lose their leaves, they both have a lot of branches that tend to die each year, and they both grow very, very fast, and they're very hardy. But they're always having branches die, and they can look like a pile of sticks in the wintertime. So I wouldn't plant them out as a specimen where you're gonna look out your kitchen window every day and see in the wintertime see this bare pile of sticks of a tree. But tuck it in with some other species and in a more woodlot type setting, and you got some really good habitat you can provide for wildlife. Okay, if I could only have one plant, it would be the red flowering currant. This is a wonderful shrub. It only grows about 6 feet tall or so, and equal width, has these beautiful pink blossoms, varies from white to red in the blossoms. A lot of variation in the blossom color. It starts blooming in end of March and will bloom all the way up till May, as a really long bloom period. And they're just gorgeous blossoms, handsome foliage too, nice fall color as well. And as soon as they start blooming, the hummingbirds arrive. And a great plant for hummingbirds and other pollinators. And they all of these blossoms turn into fruits that just like the Indian plum, the cedar waxwings come along, gobble up those fruits, and then and spread the seeds all over the place, and you get a lot of free volunteer red flowering currant on your property. The one thing red flowering currant has to have is a well-drained soil. It does not tolerate wet growing conditions. And the more sun you have, the more blossoms you're going to get. Okay, so, and I've talked to lots of people that, in the Agnew area where they have a fairly tight soil, a lot of clay in their soil, and that's not suitable for red flowering currant. However, it's not too hard to make a mound and get them up out of the wetter clay soil, and that works because so many people like to have the red flowering currant. And now moving along, we got the serviceberry, which is a large shrub or small tree. And it has these beautiful white blossoms in mid-spring that turn into these fruits here that look a lot like blueberries, and birds love the fruits. They make a great jam. And I see a question, serviceberry is very susceptible to rust in Oregon. Is that true here too? I'm just moving to PA. I did not have rust on my serviceberry until last year, and I had it really bad last year. These orange spots develop on the fruits. Now, I had a good crop of serviceberry last year, except for there was a lot of rust with it. But so I didn't get to make very much jam from it. But it's good for the birds. So there are other things we can make jams out of and let the birds have that. But nice foliage, very attractive in all seasons, nice fall color. And both of these plants are suitable in any type landscape situation. City lots, they'll do just fine. They don't spread, other than that the birds eat the seeds, and they might eat the fruits and might spread the seeds. But other than that, they're very tidy plants and easy to grow. And the serviceberry, what it really prefers is much like the vine maple, growing on the edge where it gets a little shade, a little protection, and some sun. The more sun it has, the more blossoms and fruits you're going to get, and it can tolerate being out in full sun as well. All right, we've got a couple of evergreen shrubs, broadleafed evergreens, the Oregon grapes. There's the tall Oregon grape and the low Oregon grape. They both have these clusters of yellow blossoms and they bloom in early spring, very early in the spring, and the fruits are almost identical on the two. The tall Oregon grape will grow a good 8 feet tall, maybe even more. And then the low Oregon grape is a ground cover, and they both spread. So you got to keep that in mind. Typically, people plant the Oregon grape as a ground cover, so they want it to spread, to fill in all the voids, and they'll send a root out, a new plant shoots up and eventually covers an area. With the tall Oregon grape, it's a nice sized evergreen for a screen, but you got to keep in mind that it is going to send up new plants and it's not going to stay put. It's easy to prune. That's not hard to keep it in check by pruning, but you can't just walk away and think it's going to stay there forever. So tall Oregon grape likes a little more sun than shade, and low Oregon grape likes a little more shade than sun, but they go either way. And they both grow in very poor soil conditions. They can take sandy, gravelly soils, and they're very, very hardy once established. And the birds really like the fruits on the Oregon grapes as well. And you can make a nice jelly from the Oregon grape juice if you add a ton of sugar. They're super tart. Okay, moving along into late spring, early summer, we've got mock orange and ocean sprays when these two bloom. And both are very fragrant. Mock orange gets its name because it smells like orange blossom. Very sweet, beautiful orange blossom fragrance. Ocean spray has a pretty unique fragrance. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's fragrant, but very different. They both grow in poor soils, sandy, gravelly soils, and once established, grow quite quickly and grow up to 10 feet tall and wide. They're deciduous, so they lose their leaves. And one of the things that some people don't like so much about the ocean spray is all of these blossoms, they will turn to seed clusters, and they start out white, and then they eventually turn cream color, and then seed clusters, and they're brown, and then they persist on the shrub all the way into the following summer. And so while there are no leaves on the ocean spray during the winter time, you see all these old seed clusters that look kind of like cobwebs on the shrub. The seeds, apparently, I oftentimes see little songbirds hanging out on the seed clusters, so they must be getting the little tiny seeds out of there. Bush tits like to nest in the ocean spray. They're both very easy to grow. The more sun you have, the more blossoms you're going to get, but they can both tolerate a little bit of shade as well. I would say back here, mock orange, you could probably find a place on a city lot where it's going to be good. Ocean spray you could also, but keep in mind that in the wintertime, you're going to be looking at those shrubs with no leaves and the cobwebby looking seed clusters on them. All right, some plants that spread here. We got thimbleberry and Nootka rose. Thimbleberry, I think, is a really neat plant. It's got huge, soft leaves, these white blossoms in late spring, early summer, and then these fruits that are like raspberry. They're a type of raspberry where you pick them off and there's the hollow part, and they look just like a thimble, hence the name. Thimbleberry does spread, but not real aggressively, and it'll grow in sun or shade and tolerates different soil conditions. Nootka rose, it spreads very aggressively, and it'll grow in sun or shade or wet or dry. It'll grow anywhere. And once you get Nootka rose established, you'll have a bugger of a time getting rid of it. So, or keeping it in bounds and maintaining it and keeping it under control. So I do not recommend planting Nootka rose, definitely not on a city lot. You need some space for it, and keep in mind it's going to spread. If you do want to grow a hedgerow, Nootka rose is great for hedgerows, but you're still going to have to do some maintenance. You're going to have to mow brush hog along the side of it to keep it from suckering and sending out new plants. Because what it's going to want to do is keep spreading and spreading and spreading. But it has these beautiful fragrant blossoms, and then it's turned into the rose hips there. And both of these, like in any of these thicket forming plants, they provide really good habitat for ground nesting birds. And snowberry. Snowberry's just like Nootka rose, except without the thorns. Spreads, grows in sun or shade, wet or dry. And in fact, here you got a really nice hedgerow that has both snowberry and Nootka rose. And this is very common along the country roads, small country roads in the Dungeness area. You see this a lot. And it's a really attractive. I think you got the contrast of the white berries on the snowberry and the red hips on the rose. The stems on the snowberry after it loses its leaves are that gray color, and rose, the previous year's growth stems on the rose is red. So there's a nice contrast there, but it's going to spread. So you gotta keep mowing on both sides to keep it in check. And snowberry, here you see it when it's leafed out. This is a nice looking little picture here, right? But this is what it looks like after it loses its leaves. Keep that in mind. And some shrubs that like wet conditions. So we got Pacific ninebark and black twinberry. They can grow in a silt loam soil, or otherwise they got to grow somewhere where they can grow in silt loam or clay, but they really prefer wet growing conditions. And the ninebark gets its name from it's a multi-stem shrub, but the stems have this really peely bark on them, and the blossoms are like snowballs in the summertime. Early summer they bloom, and the blossoms only last about a week, and then they turn to seed clusters like you see in here. Whereas the black twinberry, it blooms spring through summer, and you get these pairs of trumpet-shaped yellow blossoms on the twinberry that turn into these fruits. Hence the name, black twinberry there, black fruits with these maroon bracts around them. I actually think that the fruits are more attractive than the blossoms are, but you will have both in the summertime, both blossoms and fruits throughout the summer. They both grow 10 or 12 feet tall and wide, and like I said, they really prefer wet conditions, but you can get away with growing them in a silt loam soil, and they'll do okay. And another one for wet growing conditions, the red osier dogwood. It's known for its red stems in the wintertime. Very attractive looking there with the red stems. But what I really like about the red osier dogwood is the fall color. This is a nice picture of the fall color. It's got purples and reds and all different shades in between too. But in the fall, if you're ever driving around down the road and you see in a wild location, you see a red bush, red leaves, it's almost certainly going to be red osier dogwood. They have blossoms that are not real conspicuous. They're not one of the flowering dogwoods that are famous for the beautiful blossoms. They're more grown for the stems, but they have these blossoms and then fruits that the birds like. Deer really like to browse on the red osier dogwood, but it grows so fast that they can usually tolerate plenty of browse. And red osier dogwood is very easy to propagate from hardwood cuttings too. So in late winter, you can prune off a branch and stick it in the ground. And if you have plenty of moisture in the location where you put it, then chances are it's going to sprout some roots, and you can propagate it that way. Okay, and this red osier dogwood actually prefers wetter conditions than the last two I mentioned, the 9-bark and the twinberry. But again, if you have a nice silt loam soil or clay soil that even isn't all that wet, once it's established, it can tolerate some pretty dry conditions, dry summers. Okay, so that was the section on covering our common trees and shrubs. Looking at the chat here, and oh, so is snowberry toxic? And I believe the answer to that is yes. Although this is not a workshop on what you can and can't eat, so don't believe anything I say when I say something about whether it's edible or not. Do your own research. Do you know what maple-like tree on South Vancouver Island has bright red foliage? Well, if it's a native, it's probably vine maple. If it's not native, then it's probably a Japanese maple. There are a whole bunch of different Japanese maples that have really nice fall color. There's also red maple, which is from eastern United States, and there are many cultivars of red maples. They tend to be larger trees, but there are many cultivars that have bright red foliage. So that's probably what you're seeing with the bright red foliage, if it's a tree. And some of the cultivars of the red maple are columnar. Let's see, get back up. So someone asks, do you have someone that can review our plans or a recommendation? I will talk about that at the very end. And does Clallam County have a backyard wildlife sanctuary program? Well, Clallam County would not, and we at Clallam Conservation District do not, because I'm pretty sure that's a Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife program, the backyard wildlife sanctuary program. If anyone knows otherwise, you can post it in the chat there. And someone says, common snowberry is an important winter food source for quail, pheasant, and grouse, but is considered poisonous to humans. The berries contain the alkaloid. Okay, thanks, Scott. Appreciate that. So let the birds eat the snowberries. Okay, we'll move on to the final section here. We got 15 minutes to go. So we'll go through this fairly quickly. There are various options for your plant material type that you can get. Seeds, cuttings, bare root, plugs, potted, and balled and burlap. And we're going to talk about the bare root because that's what we're selling here in our plant sale. And that's stuff that takes a little special care. And I just want to point out that fall is the best time to plant. And people always say, well, then why do you have a plant sale in the winter? Well, because we sell bare root, and the only time you can sell bare root plants is when they're dormant, and that's the winter time. So, and I'll get to this a little bit more about your options. But the reason that fall is the best time to plant is because in the fall, the rains, this is a graph of precipitation. The rains are increasing, so you don't have to do any watering. Maybe just the first time you plant is the only time you need to water until the following summer. and the soil is still warm enough that the roots are going to start growing and it's going to get established, start getting established, and the plant is going dormant. So it's going into dormancy, so it doesn't need water. Whereas in the springtime, you plant here, the ground is really cold, the roots are in shock, they're not going to grow, the rains are tapering off, and the plant is coming out of dormancy. So you got everything going against you in the spring and everything going in your favor or the plant's favor in the fall. So that's why fall's the best time to plant. You can't plant bare root stock in the fall, but I'll talk about what you can do. So advantages of bare root and plug stock, these are plugs here, is they're one of the cheapest types of plants you can get. They're because they don't have soil, they're light and easy to plant and easy to ship, and they establish quickly. The big disadvantage is the seasonal availability. You can only get them in the wintertime. And because they're bare root, they're delicate and vulnerable to desiccation. So you gotta get the roots covered up and get them taken care of right away. Okay, so if you do get your bare root plants, this is what you got to do with them. You want to either put them in their permanent home, plant them right away, or if you can't do that, then you put them in pots or heal them in the garden. Or if you want to plant in the fall, then put them in pots and take care of them during that first growing season in the pots, and then plant them out later. If you can't do any of these things, then you can store them in a cool, dark, frost-free place, but for a short amount of time as possible, less than a week. And make sure the roots don't dry out. Okay. Every year we get people that get some plants and then they head off to somewhere else. And then they come back and they plant them and the plants die. And we ask, well, what happened? And well, we stuck them behind the garage and we came back a month later and we planted them. And yeah, you can't do that. Okay, so if you do pot up your plants, remember, this is a temporary thing that you're doing. You're only doing it for the most part because you can't get them planted out in their permanent home right away, or you want to wait and plant them out in their permanent home in the fall. So plan ahead, get some pots. Nurseries oftentimes have plant pots to give away. There's a recycle place in Carlsberg that where you can get pots. Get your potting soil ready. You don't want to use regular topsoil, but you can get away with mixing potting soil with topsoil to make your potting soil go further. And then you put them in a place where you're not going to forget about them, where they're going to be easy to water, where they're protected from the wind and the sun. And remember, it's temporary. Here you can see what happens when you forget about a plant or it's in the pot too long. They get root bound. And they're basically shot when that happens. They're no good, and that happens all the time. I see that very frequently. Roots have grown out through the holes at the bottom of the pot and into the ground, and yeah, just don't forget about them. Put them somewhere where you can easily take care of them. Alternatively, you can heal them in. And this is just a quick and dirty way to make sure the roots get covered. You can dig a trench in your vegetable garden and stick the plants in there. You can put them in close together and then just get the roots covered. But remember, this is very temporary. I've seen people do this too, and several years later they remember that, oh yeah, it's time to move those plants out and put them where they need to go. And the roots are all intertwined and it's impossible to separate them out. And so one other thing I'll point out about either planting or potting, either way, you're going to have to take care of those plants during that first growing season. You can be taking care of them in pots, making sure, during the hot summer time, they're getting watered every other day probably. Or if you plant them out in their permanent location, you're going to be needing to water when it's really hot and dry. You're going to be watering every other week probably. Maybe down to once a month, but it depends on where you're planting. If you're planting in a place where it's easy to get them watered, then you might as well go ahead and do that rather than going through the effort of potting them up. Okay, and then when you do go out to plant your bare root plants, soak them in water so they can get hydrated, and dig the hole twice as wide as the roots, but not too deep, so you don't, if you dig too deep, then you get settling and then roots get exposed. Make sure you don't have any air pockets. What I like to do is, and this is one really big plant in a bucket, but plants we sell, you can usually fit several plants in one bucket. So you put all your plants in the bucket, and then you go out and start digging all your holes, and then you come back and one at a time you start putting your plants in the ground. Rather than cramming roots into the hole, if there's a really long root, then prune it instead of J-rooting it or something, jamming it in. Okay, and then you partially backfill. Try not to, you don't need to add any amendments. Try to use native soil if you can. Sometimes you're in a really rocky spot and you dig a hole like this and you end up with this big, huge pile of rocks and there's no soil to put back in. Well, yeah, you're going to have to add some soil in that case. But and then if you water as you go, then that helps get rid of any air pockets that are in there, and then get it good and settled in and packed in, and water it again, and then mulch. And if you're growing in, putting your plants in a grassy area, you're probably going to want to use plant protectors. Okay, and this just shows you some of the wrong things to do. There's the J root. If you got too long of roots, jamming the roots, this is how you want to do it. Well, pretty straightforward stuff there. Okay, quickly, site preparation, different ways to do it. You can scalp away the sod and plant for individual plants. You can cultivate an area and try to eradicate all the competing vegetation. Or my preference is sheet composting, where you're just covering the ground with mulch to smother out the existing vegetation, and then you can come in and plant. Or you can do this around existing plants. But if you do this now, then you'll have really good growing conditions and planting conditions come fall if you pot your plants up. Obviously, hardly any of us have equipment like this to move that stuff around, so that's a challenge. I'll get to that here in a second, but here's an illustration of sheet composting. Cut the sod away, and you can layer cardboard down or construction paper, cover it with mulch, make sure it's all watered real well, and then it starts decomposing. The sod decomposes, and you got really good growing conditions, and you eliminated that competing vegetation, and you're improving the soil at the same time. You don't have to use the cardboard or construction paper, but if you don't, then you want to double the depth of the mulch that you apply. And the challenge with this is spreading all that, spreading all the mulch. You either got to have child labor or you got to have a tractor or something like that to do it. So what I recommend, though, if you're doing a lot of planting, bring in a lot of mulch and hire someone. If you don't have a little tractor, hire someone with a little tractor and have them spread it all out for you. It'll save you so much time and effort and back pain, and your site will be so much easier to work with. and your plants will love it. They won't need nearly as much water, and they'll be much more successful. And obviously with maintenance, if you mulch well, then that's going to save the amount of water you have to apply. It's going to inhibit competing vegetation, and as it breaks down, it adds organic matter and improves soil fertility. And chances are you're going to have to water for the first 1 to 3 years. All depends on the weather conditions and the plant and the site conditions that you have, and how much mulch you have. But when you do water, try to soak the entire root zone, rather than frequent little waterings. Do infrequent deep watering. And lastly, I just want to throw in for this is a trick for natural landscaping, referred to as cues to care. These are just adding little human elements to your landscape to distinguish between the more managed part and of your landscape and the wild part. And all it does is and pathways can do it any number of ways. You can add cues to care, but what it does is tells the observer that what they see is intentional. It's not a neglected landscape. Just mowing a pathway through tall grass shows the observer that it's supposed to be this way. So little tricks to the landscaping to reduce your labor. Okay, plant sources. Obviously, we've been talking about our native plant sale. You can order online. We're accepting orders through January 27th. Pickup is at the end of the month. But don't just depend on Clallam Conservation District's plant sale. You gotta order large quantities from us. If you need small quantities, go to the nurseries. And you go there and you say, well, but they don't have native plants. Ask them for them. If you don't ask, they're never going to know that people want them. And they can get their wholesale nurseries that specialize in native plants. So as long as you don't ask, they're not going to know that there's a demand. So please go out to our local nurseries and try to give them business and help them transition to selling more native plants. Okay, and lastly, in the good old days, I used to teach a natural landscaping course, 3 lectures, 3 field trips each April and October. I didn't do it last year. I'm going to try to do something this year that will probably, at least this spring, will be online, and maybe a combination of online, and maybe we can do some small group field trips, and then I would also do one of the field trips was the same as a separate one that I would do a native plant field workshop each spring and fall, just walking around and looking at native plants and learning how to identify them and going through all those things I just did through the slides earlier with the plants, but much more enjoyable being outside doing it. And the question about do we review plans and that sort of thing, we don't like to do that sort of thing because there are people that make their livings doing that out in the private sector. What I have done is anyone that took the natural landscaping course, I would do a consultation after they've developed their plan, so I would be able to provide feedback and help solve some special problems or whatever, and I'd go out and do a site visit to do that. Inevitably, someone would each time would ask me to, can you come review my plan, and they wouldn't have a plan, and they'd say, what do you think I should do here? How about over here? What should I do? That's the sort of thing I'm not going to do. But given the fact that we're not doing the natural landscaping courses now, I might entertain, and I probably won't do site visits, but I would provide some feedback if you can send an email to info@clallamcd.org, then and I can get some information about what your objectives are and what your site conditions are, and then I can give you some feedback that way. Okay, what do we got for questions? We've got a minute over here. Megan, I think, provided the information about the backyard wildlife sanctuary. Yes, Department of Fish and Wildlife. Can we get a copy of the slide presentation? We can't really provide you with a copy of the slide presentation, but it's being recorded, so it'll be available for review in a few days on our website. And that looks like all it is for questions. Whoa, we lost some people. I guess 5:30 people boarded there. Okay, so hopefully that was what you folks needed, and a nice distraction from the craziness going on out there these days. So that's all I've got.
Thanks, Joe. That was excellent. I'll go ahead and end our meeting then, and we're right on time, almost right on time.
Thanks, Megan.
All right, thanks, Joe. Bye-bye,
right.
everyone.
Bye.